Movements don't fail because people stop caring. They fail when leaders burn out from carrying the weight of holding and creating connection all by themselves. Welcome to Sustaining Social Change for leaders working on the front lines of structural transformation. I'm John Rodríguez, here with Fred Jefferson III. We explore the behaviors and dynamics that shape whether your change efforts collapse or endure. In this episode, we cover the hidden cost of leadership, the invisible work leaders carry, why groups start to break down, how leaders set the tone, where leaders begin to burn out, the warning signs most people miss, what it takes to sustain yourself, and we provide a community engagement question. Greetings and good day, Fred.
So good to see you. I'm excited to be here to do what we do.
Today, we're going to talk about holding everyone together until you realize it's quietly draining the very energy you need to sustain the work. We're calling this episode The Hidden Cost of Holding Everyone Together. We know this movement work is difficult. Movement leaders and facilitators quietly spend massive amounts of time and energy keeping people connected, calm, and moving forward. Movements don't fail because people stop caring. They fail when leaders burn out from carrying the weight of holding and creating connection all by themselves. We unpack these invisible drains, explore why they matter, and offer practical ways to protect your energy so you can sustain yourself and those working on change that matters. Why does this matter, Fred?
Why it's important and what it is so interconnected, right? Because I don't think that folks really appreciate, at least I didn't appreciate how much of holding that I was doing as a leader. It's real. The energy that it takes to hold psychological safety, right? Because we don't see it, but we feel it. It's measurable and it's depleting. So the question is, what do we do about that? You know, what's coming to my mind right now as you were talking, what's this container that we're holding? I think it's important for us to think about it through the lens of, group relations theory, right? And that the container that we're talking about is that psychological space that holds anxiety, holds uncertainty, and it's also holding that space where we turn conflict, anxiety, and uncertainty into the productive work that can happen. The opportunity for productive work happens through that holding, right? And that the leader functions as that primary container, absorbing the stress, absorbing and metabolizing and transmogrifying this energy into something that's usable, manageable, and sustainable. That's really how I make sense of how do you bring practicality to pragmatism to what are we talking about here? We're talking about that ability to take psychology, right, and put it into real action. So what happens when I talk about group relations theory with you? I know you got a lot to say in that arena.
For the folks on the front lines, they might be wondering, why are these guys talking about theory, group relations theory? Well, we just want to ground you in some of the work and some of the things that have been done out there. Strong groups are high-performing groups. Strong groups get stuff done. Strong groups don't let their normal human dynamic get in the way of the things that matter. And so those are the things that we're talking about when we're talking about group relations theory. People have studied these things. It's very normal. It's very common. And what we want to do is make sure that we help ground you. So we're going to share some ways that people do this. We have some resources at the end. For those of you with the appetite, by all means, look up these things, check them out, read about them. What we want to do now is get into, why do these things matter? What is it about this these dynamics, these things that drain us? Why do this work? Why pay attention? Some would argue, Fred, as you've heard many times, well, let's just cut to the chase. Let's just get to the work. We don't need to be paying attention to all these people in this group and what they're going through and what's happening with them. They just need to be about the work. Well, that might sound good in a moment of unbridled enthusiasm. However, it doesn't work in practice. In practice, what works is understanding what's going on with you as a leader, what's going on for each member of your group, and how are you going to navigate those needs so that you can stay in the game long enough to win, right? Long enough to achieve the things you want to achieve. It matters because if you're not paying attention to these things, all of the investment of time, resources will be for naught, because you'll unravel, because you're unable as a leader to hold the group together, because the strain and pressure of it is starting to show up in ways that are not productive for the group.
So, John, I rolled up my sleeves, brother. Now, now we're getting into it, and what I hear you saying is really the bottom line. Why is this important? Well, we're trying to prevent burnout, right? If we do not pay attention to the cost of holding the container, right? And I do this on purpose. We can only hold our hands out and hold for so long, right? We as leaders, as folks in the arena know, you can only fight for so long before you have to take a rest, right? And so what John and I are really trying to get to is how might we prevent burnout? How might we pay attention to what the cost, make it no longer hidden, but front and center. I know entering into this space is I'm gonna have to pay. I'm gonna have to pay for that with my energy. And my energy, I don't have unlimited stores. I'm a human being. I don't have unlimited stores. None of us do. So
True.
if we want to prevent burnout, right? We need to understand, well, how does it show up? It shows up through a number of ways. One is emotional exhaustion, right? I know I've felt it. I felt drained. I felt paralyzed, unable to give more. I've given all my all. I'm done. And the minute I get burned out, I can't lead. And if I can't lead, my movement is going to fall and fail, right? Another way that burnout manifests itself is through cynicism and detachment from the very people that I'm trying to lead. Oh, these people don't know. They only knew what I was going through. If they only felt the way that I felt, right? All of a sudden, that's another flag. And the third thing that happens when we get burned out, well, we start feeling ineffective. We start questioning our own impact, which then creates this downward spiral. And I'm no longer effective. I can't lead effectively, and people get hurt as a result. And so we often get caught up in this loop that I'm the only one that can get the work done. So I'm not going to reveal the stressors that are on me. And the next thing you know, the whole system collapses because we don't pay attention to when we've gotten ourselves into this place of burnout before we even start paying attention. And I think some of the research tells us that it's not just Fred talking. There are plenty of studies out there about nonprofit leaders or those who are holding roles, right? Holding the spaces have higher rates of burnout than other staff. Trying to hold a psychologically safe place for everybody else means that you're in danger. And the good news is there's a couple things that we can do about that. What's your experience, John, with watching leaders fail, not because they're not competent or confident, but because they're just plain tired?
Yeah. The way you said that, they're confident and their competence is not showing up because they're tired. And sometimes they're competent, but their confidence is sabotaged by fatigue and an inability to see how they're showing up. So, overconfidence, like I have all the answers. I know what to do. I will tell you what to do. You will follow my instructions. That's not movement work. That's not collective work. That's not shared work. That's someone reaching a point of frustration where they start to imagine that they have all the answers. No one has all the answers. So I want to encourage the folks listening, please chime in, share your comments about when have you seen this happen? Share your stories. When has this happened to you? Have you seen this get in the way of something you're trying to do when the leader is at a point where they can't hold it together anymore? So one thing I'll notice, and I assume this happens to me, is that I find it easier, Fred, to notice when others are struggling with holding the group together. I'm thinking about one leader in particular right now who is working on performance art in the activist space, right? Artists as activists. And this particular leader had a wonderful, active, philanthropic funder who was interested in the performance art and was a performance artist themselves. And their inability to see how poorly they were treating individuals sabotaged their collective work. Things like wanting all of the credit, not sharing success, not listening. And what was causing that within them, I don't know exactly to this day. I know that I could see the symptoms, I could see the impact on others. And it made me wonder, when do I do that? So, one way that I think about this is if you're noticing this in others, what can you notice about yourself? What can you learn about yourself if you're having trouble holding a group together? Has that ever happened to you? I'm asking you and others, the people listening, share your story. You know, that euphoric stage, Fred, when everybody's excited here, we're meeting, we're having a good time, we're going to take on this cause, isn't this wonderful? And then as things play out and you start to look at the hard work that's necessary, things start to unravel because the hard work requires consistent action, consistent focus, consistent involvement. And one of the things it requires is the skill to suspend your own needs and be really good at listening in such a way that people want to stay with the movement, stay with the work. The skill level you need to keep a 100% volunteer group together is likely higher than the skill required to keep a group together that's paid and compensated.
Yeah, you're tapping into this idea of thinking beyond the self, right? Thinking beyond the the individual. Now we're starting to tap into this idea, this concept of group identity, and but more important, group energy, right? This the concept that groups have a collective nervous system, right? A shared emotional and physiological state that emerges from the individual, one individual nervous system, to the other. And that concept is real, and it determines so many things, right? It determines the quality of our attention, our present. It determines the capacity for each member to understand the complexity of the change. It determines our ability to tolerate conflict and productivity, and this idea of a collective nervous system also determines whether or not we have access to creativity and the creative energies, right? So this is one of the hard things that I think groups struggle with, is that they don't take a look at the groupiness. What is there's this thing, right? Just like holding the container, there's this thing, this entity called the group. And so what is the group doing to me? And what am I doing to the group? And there's this constant exchange of energy. And if we're not careful, we inadvertently bring the group down, when what we're trying to do is bring the group up. If we do this systems thought right, we can have so much more impact than just by force of the individual alone, right? And when we're not paying attention to the group dynamics, the group energy, or this idea of a group nervous system, well, meetings become reactive rather than responsive. Conflict tends to escalate into personal attacks. Strategic thinking gets displaced by, oh, I got to manage this crisis that has bubbled up because I didn't pay attention to the group. And more often than not, time is wasted on repair rather than the content that we are having, right? And a kind of a real world example of that is, it's just entering into a coalition meeting and watching it go sideways. Someone said something and it triggered someone else. Everybody got tense. And all of a sudden, what was supposed to be an hour strategy meeting becomes a 45-minute trying to get everybody together, right? That's
Yeah.
when the group goes off the rails, right? And the thing about it is it's preventable.
That moment you described, when that goes off the rails, that's when the leader, the person trying to hold it all together, the hidden cost surfaces. Because maybe you, as the organizer, leader, facilitator, go into this thinking, why are we thinking about the homeless, the children, those stricken by the consequences of what we're working on, and unaware that part of the work is the disappointment, the extra energy just to hold people when you have those breakdowns that you just described. Now I have to regroup and go, wait a minute. That is part of the work. That is the nature of being able to listen to a group in such a way that when people do have those breakdowns or those moments, the question is, am I willing? That's something to ask yourself and to think about, because it's not going to be smooth sailing and easy to keep a group on point. That North Star, the thing that brought you together in the first place, they're going to be natural human dynamics. And that is extremely draining. If you find yourself in that situation, what can you do? Are you willing to prepare for those inevitable moments? If that's not something you like, you just want to focus in on your part of the work. My part of the work was to raise X number of dollars. My part of the work was to set up a room. If that piece is what you want to do, then maybe facilitating the group's dynamics is not something you want to immerse yourself in, because the consequence to you and the energy required on your part to hold the group together is beyond the role or the way you can play it this time. So all worthwhile things to examine. Regardless of where you fall, we're going to talk now about what can you do to prepare, or when you're in these situations, or to manage that hidden cost. So, Fred, one particular executive director that was quite successful, she kept a group of about 75 people together, different committees, different groups, using collective impact model and convening.
Mhm.
However, one of the hidden costs were before and after each meeting, she had to call people individually. On the front end, before the sessions or meetings, was to make sure people were aligned. They got the heads up. They didn't feel blindsided by any new information that was going to be shared or any new issues. So, what does that mean? That's extra work. Because now I have a committee of, I don't know, let's just say for sake of discussion, 20 people. I've sent out the email. Did they all read it? Probably not. Have they internalized it? Probably not. So she would take the time to call those that she thought needed that sort of heads up, get in alignment. I need your support. I need your analysis ahead of time. That's at least 10 to 20 calls before the meeting. That's extra work. That's what it takes to hold the group together under those circumstances. Then you have the meeting with the normal dynamics, which is mostly where our conversation has been during the actual session or gathering itself. But that pre-work was a lot of work. Then after the session, there was some misunderstandings, misalignments, rolled eyes, silence, a little passive aggressive or dramatic statements were made. So now she's calling all of those individuals after the meeting. That's another 5 to 10 calls. Now she's doing follow-up calls at 7:30, 8 o'clock. She's supposed to be home with her husband and kids. Those are some of the realities of understanding the hidden costs to you as a leader and to the group. What can be done? What are you walking into? Do you understand it? And what are you up for? Or are you willing to not do that pre and post work and let the, excuse the cliche, let the chips fall where they may? Well, she's not willing to do that because they're on the cusp. She can see just around the corner. We're almost there. I just need to make sure we stay sufficiently aligned because we're about to experience a breakthrough. These are the questions we all have to ask ourselves. But does it matter enough? Why does it matter? Because she wants to be successful. And you can't do it forever. It has a season. Think in terms of resting, think in terms of sabbaticals, or knowing when you've reached your time.
That story reminds me of another story of a leader that I was coaching. I won't go into the details of it, but the ultimate outcome of going above and beyond holding the container for everyone else cost this person their health, and literally ended up in the hospital. Doctors didn't know what was happening as her one by one her internal organs were shutting down for no reason, but the reason was stress related. The good news, she was able to recover from holding the container too long, holding everyone else up except for herself, but at what cost? And it was a cost to her health, cost to her family, health, cost to her job, and a cost to all of the programs that she was leading, the cause leading, right? And so, one of the so what summary for me is that if we don't address the hidden cost of holding, we lose our best leaders. If we don't address the hidden cost, our meetings become traumatic rather than transformational. If we don't address the cost, we end up harming ourselves and the people that we love. At the end of the day, there's so much that we can do. I think one of the things that it's important for us to kind of just hammer home is the performance of breathing and the science behind the neuroscience behind what happens when you don't breathe right and what happens when you breathe right. This is high performance psychology that we're talking about. When we breathe normally, we tend to breathe 16, maybe 20 breaths per minute, right? And it's usually shallow in the upper lungs. And we're only using about 30% of our capacity. And when we lose our capacity under stress, our breathing starts to pick up maybe 20, 30 beats or breaths per minute. And we're even shallower. So we have less and less oxygen going to what? The prefrontal cortex. Shallow breathing equals shallow thinking, right? Decreased oxygen to the brain reduces our ability to think. We actually become dumber under stress. And there's so much that happens when we don't breathe right. We have narrowed attention, reduced working memory, decreased empathy, and here's the kicker, higher reactivity. So it's harder and harder for us to stay calm in the storm if we're not breathing. And it reminds me, John, of the story that you told me about the pulse oximeter that you did. Could you share that story about how that act actually changed how people thought about breathing?
This device is familiar to most people. When you go get a physical, they put it on your finger and it gives you an oxygen reading. So what I did is I purchased a bunch of these and I would have groups put them on during the session so they could take their reading and record their numbers. Inevitably, the numbers would be at some fixed level. Then we say, now let's do some deep breath work together. Deliberate, deep inhales and exhales. Fill the lungs as completely as you can. Get that full sense of your body taking in all of the oxygen you can. And they would again look at the device and see the numbers going up 2, 3, 4 points. Then we'd ask the question, how's that possible? You're breathing through your nose. Your nose is connected to your lungs. Why is that number changing? What is going on? And we'd have conversations about it. Sometimes there'd be medical people in some of these groups or people who understood the physiology, and they'd share and explain and learn from each other. What else is going on in the blood? How is this affecting your performance? Do you feel calmer after you breathe? Those kinds of things. It's very easy to forget about your breathing. If you're an athlete, if you're delivering a baby, if you're in high stress situations, what do they say? Breathe, breathe. It's not that you don't know how to breathe. It's that during high stress situations, sometimes we need reminders to recalibrate ourselves. This is a low cost reminder, no RFP required. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't have to have a committee or a vote. This is something you have direct control over. And the benefits when this becomes a practice, a ritual, especially under stress, the benefits are enormous. One group that I work with does this before every meeting. Every major meeting or meeting with external partners, they stop, they call it the 3 breaths. Right? This is something I learned when I was working with the Center for Centering Healing in Boston and Cleo Jameson and others. The point is that it's physiological as well as emotional because it grounds us and calms us for whatever it is we're experiencing or whatever it is we're about to enter into. I'd like to go back a little bit to what you shared in your story, Fred. You're working with someone.
Yeah. I was working with a foreign service officer who was at a diplomatic post in Africa during the COVID era, just dealing with everything that happens in the embassy from helping Americans abroad to international affairs to cutting budgets at home, trying to make sure that all the pieces of an embassy are working coherently. And she believed in the mission, so much so that it literally took her health. She was overworking, not regulating herself, not taking the time that she needed to recover. And inevitably, she ended up in the hospital, and it was basically her body was shutting her down. Her body basically said, if you're not going to take care of yourself, I am.
Well,
And the doctors didn't know what. There was no rational cause for just organ failure. Literally, her body was shutting down, and it was dicey for a little while there, but she was able to make full recovery. And the only thing that the doctors were saying was that the stress was wreaking havoc on her immune system, and it went haywire. And looked at her body as the thing that needed to be resisted. And luckily, she was able to recover. But that was just an example of not paying attention to the cost factors of holding everybody together. Only I can solve this. Only I'm responsible. Only me, right? And sometimes that's true. And if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, you can't help anybody. And that just became really crystal clear to me, is that the body keeps score, and we have to take care of it so that we can do this work. I've just watched too many people fail because they never thought about what does it mean to actually hold the container.
thank you. Thank you for recapping that for me. One of the things that I'm wondering about is how did she get out of this set of circumstances? What was she able to do to prevent this going forward? What kinds of awareness, coaching, exercises, rituals did she have to unlearn some things, learn some new things? What were some ways you were able to collectively close this gap so that she wouldn't find herself in this situation again?
Well, as you can imagine, the health scare was the best thing for her, and in the sense of knowing how devastating that was, knowing that it took almost a year to recovery. But what it did was give her perspective and time
Mm.
on reflecting what were the things that she ignored prior. And it was basically, it was the discipline. It was the basics. Ignoring, what are you putting in your body? Ignoring the amount of rest that you need, not taking the vacation, the rest and the R&R that were afforded her. She made sure that everybody else got that time off, but she never did it for herself. And more importantly, what we worked on was what are the daily disciplines that you can put into place to create those respites in the moment. I often use the metaphor of what the whitewater, paddling, right? When you're in the white water, what are you looking for? Is you're looking for those rest periods so that you can enter back into the stream, right? And the rest areas are the eddies behind the rock, which looks like the most dangerous place on the river, but is actually one of the most tranquil spaces to be because the white water is just rushing around you while you're at a steady state, recovering and deciding when you want to go back into the fray of the white water. But it was all about discipline, all about understanding what the flags of burnout are. How do you recognize it? How do you avoid it?
How does that play out in real time? What does that look like in practice, frequency? Is it a conversation? Is it coaching in a particular way? Does this happen weekly, monthly? What were some of the things that played out in method between the two of you that enabled her to get to this point of, say, improved stability and self-awareness?
I became an accountability partner for her radical self-care. We met every other week for almost a year after. And I would say that almost every one of those sessions was deeply rooted in her self-care disciplines, meaning, you know, developing the habits of meditation, developing, nutritional habits, developing journaling habits to create the life is all around creating the life that she wanted to, that she expected, but taking on more of a creative mode rather than a reactive being space. What does my ideal day look like? What will I do when these stressors come about? What will be my practices to reduce the cortisol and adrenaline hits that come every day? And how will I address those stressors specifically, right? And so she created a kind of a, a stressor matrix, right? When the meeting goes off the rails, this is what I'm going to do to recover from that meeting. When my 5-year old disobeys and doesn't go to sleep and I lose sleep, this is what I'm going to do to manage that stressor, right? So she had literally a a stress reduction matrix that allowed her to feel the feels, but more importantly, clear the content. And of course, a lot of it was breathing exercises, and setting the intention for who it is that I want to be and how do I want to react when these things happen, right? So lots of visualization, lots of practice, lots of role play. It was an extraordinary total shift in behavior and how she showed up. She became a model for how to build resilient practice, and she kept her time sacred. For example, one of the things that she didn't do before, she would always stay in the office until 9 at night. But when she returned, she left and took everybody with her at 5 o'clock. Time to go home. If y'all want to check in later, you're free to do that. But nobody's in the office, including me. So everybody's free. So she freed up, right? So she started to do and behave differently, which then required her team to behave and act differently. And when times of crisis happened, they were all in because they finally started to see the boss as a human being rather than the superhuman that could do all and be all for everybody. And people around her started acting different because she was different. Again, it gets back to this shared nervous system. How you show up in the system impacts the system. So she not only impacted herself in a powerful way, but she also impacted the entire group in a way that made a huge difference for everybody.
So the benefits were clear, not only to her, but to the staff and what she was modeling.
Mhm.
And that may have very well prevented others from experiencing major breakdowns, be it mental or health or something else.
Mhm.
And so the things that anchored this, and you said you were an accountability partner. So as people are listening to this idea of accountability partner, that can be any number of people, including, in this case, a coach, a professional that understands what that looks like, what's needed, what frequency, how often, how to have these deep conversations. And so people can self examine and look at if you're on the verge of that level of breakdown and you're going in and having major organ failure throughout your body. Gee, uh, seems like you should do something before you break down completely. And if this puts at risk your purpose, your shared objective, in the case of some movement work at the grassroots level, if you fail, there are no replacements necessarily. And so, what are some of the things, in addition to what I just recapped, an accountability partner, finding one? What are some of the things in practice based on your example that people can do on a daily basis? Breathe, what you intake, what you eat, this kind of thing. But when she was in the middle of this, the thing that led to her breakdown, did she need to have the breakdown? Is there a way to interrupt this cycle? Because the stakes may be so high, or she may not make it through that organ failure, which in which case she doesn't get a redo. So what are some of the alternatives to complete breakdown?
I think the first one is paying attention, right? Deepening our ability to see what's at stake, but also to see what's happening in any given environment, including the internal environment of this thing we call our body, right? And so she didn't pay attention to the warning signs. She
What would
didn't
have
be
what would it have taken to get her to pay attention? For others who haven't broken down yet, but they're sensing, they're feeling, what are the clues? What would you notice before you have complete organ failure?
you notice. I think the first thing that you notice is indeed your breathing, right? If you pay attention, wow, I'm winded just walking up a flight of stairs. I think you notice it's there's so many. It's hard for me to go. Where do you start?
You start, I think, in part by where you're struggling,
Mhm.
because going up a flight of stairs feels like struggle. Am I struggling with follow up? Am I
Right.
struggling
Yeah.
with being kind to people? Am I struggling with eating the right things? Am I stressed and struggling with how to interact with people? I like this idea of struggling. Notice where
Yeah.
you're struggling because for each person might be slightly different. Right? I may be an athlete and I'm not really struggling with my breath because I run 5 miles a day, but I'm kind of short tempered with my partner.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that, John, because those are indeed the flags, right? Where am I struggling? How come I can't remember my colleague's name who I've worked with for 5 years? What's going on there? How come it took me an hour to write 3 sentences for this email? Why did I just snap when somebody knocked on my door? Right? When I have an open door policy,
What are your takeaways from today's conversation? Where would we want to point people who are struggling with some of these issues?
a number of things are important. One, that holding the container is real. And it's a real burden, and it takes a toll. And you have to understand that there's energy that is required to do this. And I think what we're also telling people is that you don't have to do that lift alone. I think we're telling people that there are lots of things to pay attention to on how you'll know if you're losing your grip on that container, or the container is starting to spill. And it's usually in the forms that we just talked about, your reactivity to other people's and reactivity. If you're not creating yourself, you're reacting. It's better to create than to react. It all depends on how you see the world. There's so much that you can do to create the conditions in which you don't burn out. And more importantly, it's about making sure that we do what? We sustain the social change that we want to see in the world.
This episode's community engagement question is: if you're holding everyone together, who's holding you? Think about the invisible work you do to keep your team, coalition, or organization intact. Who supports you in that labor? If the answer is no one, or I don't know, what would it take to build that support? Share your ideas in the comments section. We look forward to hearing more from each of you, and we'll read what's in the comments for sure. And we look forward to continuing to co create a community that is out there to support one another. So, as always, be the calm in the chaos.